Ladies and gentlemen, there will come a time when you feel drained, like you've given everything you had and still it ain't enough. You prayed, you worked, you sacrificed, but life keeps throwing more at you. And right when you think you can't take another step, God says, keep going. There comes a moment in life when you feel like you've given everything you had, and yet there comes a moment in life when you feel like you've given everything you had, and yet it still doesn't seem to be enough. You wake up exhausted, your body aches, your mind is heavy, and you start questioning if it's even worth continuing. You've worked hard, you've sacrificed, you've prayed, and yet the results seem so far away. The weight of your struggle is pressing down on you, and the easiest thing to do would be to quit. But let me tell you something, your breakthrough is not behind you. It's not in stopping. It's on the other side of this very moment. This tiredness, this exhaustion, this frustration, and if you stop now, you'll never see what's waiting for you. The greatest victories in life don't come when you're strong, when you're energized, when everything is easy. They come when you've been knocked down, when you've been pushed to the limit, and something inside you whispers, keep going. That voice, that's God telling you that your story isn't over yet, that what he promised you is still ahead, but you can't get there if you stop walking now. See, tiredness is a test. It's a crossroad between those who settle and those who step into their destiny. The enemy wants you to believe that tired means stop, that because you don't feel strong, you're not capable. But tired doesn't mean defeated. It doesn't mean you're done. It means you're on the edge of something greater than you can imagine. Think about the moments in history, the people who changed the world, the ones who achieved greatness. Every single one of them had a moment when they felt like giving up, but they didn't. They pressed forward, not because they weren't tired, but because they knew what was on the other side was worth more than the pain they felt in the moment. Moses was leading his people out of Egypt, exhausted, facing doubt from every direction, but he kept walking. David stood in front of Goliath, weary from running, from fighting, from hiding, but he picked up his sling and fought one more time. And Jesus, carrying that cross, body broken, betrayed, bleeding, he could have given up. He could have said, this is too much, but he didn't. He kept going because his purpose was greater than the pain. And if he kept going for you, why would you not keep going for him? Why would you let a moment of exhaustion steal the future that God has prepared for you? The problem isn't that you're tired. The problem is that you think tired means stop, but God never told you to stop. He said, come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. That means you don't have to quit. You just have to lean on him. Because when your strength runs out, his begins. You might be struggling in your career. You've put in the hours, you've done the work, but nothing seems to be changing. You might be fighting for your family, for your dreams, for your faith, and you're wondering if it's even worth it anymore. But this is not the time to turn back. This is the time to press in, to trust that the finish line is closer than you think. Tiredness is not a sign that you're losing. It's a sign that you're in the middle of the process, that you're pushing towards something worth fighting for. The enemy wants to convince you that because you're worn out, you should walk away. But what if I told you that your blessing is waiting just beyond this moment? That the very thing you've been praying for, working for, believing for, it's right there just a little further ahead. Don't stop in the middle of the storm. Don't quit in the valley. You may feel tired, but you are not done. Keep walking, keep trusting, keep pushing, because your breakthrough is on the other side of this tiredness. And when you get there, you look back and realize that every step, every sacrifice, every moment you wanted to quit but didn't, that was God carrying you toward everything he promised. There comes a point in life when your strength fails you, when no matter how much effort you put in, no matter how determined you are, you hit a wall that seems impossible to climb. You pray, you push, you fight, and still you feel empty, weak, like you have nothing left to give. And in that moment, when you feel like breaking, when you feel like giving up, God is saying, this is where I step in. Because his strength is not for those who have it all together. It's not for the ones who never stumble, never struggle, never feel weak. No. His strength is for those who know they can't do it on their own. It's for the ones who have reached their limit, the ones who have exhausted every option, the ones who have no choice but to surrender and say, God, I need you. See, we live in a world that tells us weakness is a flaw, that struggling means you're failing, that if you don't have it all figured out, you're doing something wrong. But that's not how God sees it. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That means your weakness isn't a curse. It's an invitation, an opportunity for God to show you that what you can't do in your own strength, he can do through his. That the things you thought were impossible, the battles you thought you couldn't win, the dreams you thought were out of reach, none of it depends on your strength alone. It depends on him. When you're weak, when you're struggling, when you feel like you have nothing left, that's when God does his greatest work. Because if you could do it on your own, you wouldn't need faith. If you could climb every mountain without struggle, you wouldn't need to trust him. But it's in those moments when you're on your knees, when you run out of answers, when you feel like you can't take another step, that's when God's power shows up. Because now, it's not about what you can do, it's about what he can do through you. Look at the people God used throughout history. None of them were strong on their own. Moses had a speech problem, but God used him to speak to kings. David was just a shepherd boy, but God made him a giant slayer. Paul had a thorn in his flesh, something that kept him struggling, but God told him, my grace is sufficient. Over and over again, God didn't choose the strongest, the most qualified, the most capable. He chose the weak so that when they overcame, the world would know it was only by his power, and that's what he wants to do with you. You may feel like you don't have enough. You may feel too broken, too tired, too lost, but that's exactly when God wants to step in. Because when you're at your weakest, when you have nothing left to give, that's when he can show you that his strength never runs out. His power never fades. His grace is always enough. So don't be ashamed of your weakness. Don't let the enemy convince you that because you're struggling, because you feel like you can't go on, that you're not worthy, that you're not capable. God isn't looking for perfect people. He's looking for surrendered people. People who will say, Lord, I can't do this on my own, but I trust that you can. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to be the strongest. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to let God's strength take over where yours runs out. And when you do, you'll realize that the very thing you thought would break you was actually the thing God used to build you. Because his strength is made perfect in your weakness. And that means you're never truly weak. Because he is always strong. There will be days when you don't feel like moving forward, when the fire you once had seems to have burned out, and the weight of life presses down on you so hard that you don't see a way through. You may feel discouraged, lost, uncertain, or even afraid. The passion that once fueled you now feels distant, and the road ahead looks impossible to travel. But that is exactly why faith is not built on feelings. Faith walks when feelings fail. Faith moves when emotions say stop. Faith keeps going when everything in you wants to quit. Feelings are unstable. They shift with circumstances, rise and fall like waves in the ocean. One moment you're inspired, motivated, and ready to take on the world. The next you're tired, frustrated, and questioning everything. But faith is different. Faith is steady. Faith doesn't depend on how you feel in the moment. It depends on what you believe. And what you believe has to be greater than what you feel, because if you let feelings control your walk, you will never get to where God is calling you. Faith isn't about seeing the whole picture before you take the first step. It's about stepping forward even when you don't know how things will work out. Abraham didn't know where he was going when God told him to leave his home, but he walked anyway. Moses didn't know how the Red Sea would part, but he lifted his staff anyway. Peter didn't know if he could walk on water, but he stepped out of the boat anyway. They didn't move because they felt like it. They moved because faith demanded that they trust something greater than their emotions. Too often we let feelings dictate our actions. If we feel motivated, we work hard. If we feel inspired, we pray, we believe, we push forward. But the moment we feel tired, discouraged, or uncertain, we hesitate, we stop, we doubt. But faith says keep walking. Faith says God is still working even when you don't see it. Faith says don't let temporary feelings make you miss an eternal promise, because faith is not based on sight, and it is certainly not based on emotions. It is based on the unshakable truth that God is who he says he is, and he will do what he said he will do. Life will test you. It will throw obstacles in your path, delays, disappointments, and challenges that make you wonder if you're even on the right path. There will be moments when your feelings tell you that God is silent, that nothing is changing, that your prayers aren't being answered. But that's when faith has to take over. That's when you have to remind yourself that feelings are fleeting, but God's word is forever. That's when you have to stand on the promise that he will never leave you, never forsake you, and never fail you. If Jesus had moved based on feelings, he would have never gone to the cross. The night before his crucifixion, he prayed in agony, sweating drops of blood, asking if there was another way. His feelings in that moment were real. Pain, sorrow, suffering, but he didn't let his emotions change his mission. He chose faith over feelings, and because he did, we have salvation today. So what are you going to do when your feelings tell you to quit, when fear whispers that it's too late, when doubt tells you that you're not strong enough? Will you let emotions control your destiny, or will you let faith lead the way? Because faith walks when feelings fail. It keeps moving when everything says stop. It trusts in the unseen, believing that God is still working, even in the silence. So don't wait for your feelings to catch up to your calling. Walk in faith, because the promise is waiting for those who refuse to give up. There will be moments in life when exhaustion grips you so tightly that you start to question everything. When the weight of your responsibilities, your struggles, and your battles drains you to the point where you wonder if it's even worth it to keep pushing forward. You've poured your heart into your dreams, your goals, your calling, but all you feel is fatigue. Your body is tired. Your mind is tired. Your spirit is tired. And in that moment, the thought of giving up starts to sound reasonable. But what you must understand is that tiredness is temporary, but purpose is eternal. Fatigue comes and goes. Seasons of struggle don't last forever. The pain you feel today, the exhaustion that makes you want to quit, will pass. But the purpose God placed inside of you, that lasts forever. That is bigger than your temporary emotions. That is greater than this moment of exhaustion. The enemy wants you to believe that being tired means you should stop, that because you're weary, because you don't see results yet, it's a sign that it's over. But that's a lie. Tiredness doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means you're in the process. It means you're being stretched, shaped, refined for something greater. And if you stop now, you'll never see what's on the other side of this moment. Every great person who ever accomplished anything meaningful reached a point where they felt like giving up. Every champion, every leader, every world changer has had nights where they cried out to God, feeling like they had nothing left. But what separated them from the ones who quit was this. They understood that tiredness is temporary, but purpose is worth the fight. They knew that pain might last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. They knew that weakness doesn't mean the journey is over. It just means you need to lean on God's strength instead of your own. Moses was tired in the wilderness, leading a stubborn people, but his purpose was to reach the promised land. David was exhausted, running for his life, but his purpose was to be king. Job lost everything and had every reason to give up, but his purpose was greater than his suffering. Even Jesus, in his human body, grew tired. He grew weary. He felt the weight of the cross long before he carried it up to Calvary. But he didn't quit, because he knew that his temporary suffering was nothing compared to the eternal impact of his purpose. You are no different. What you're facing today, the fatigue you feel, the weariness that's making you question yourself, it is not the end of your story. It is just a moment, a chapter, not the conclusion. And what's waiting for you beyond this moment is bigger than anything you could imagine, but you have to keep going. You have to keep believing. You have to push through, knowing that the calling on your life is too important to be abandoned just because you feel tired. Rest when you need to, but don't quit. Lean on God's strength when yours runs out. Because your body may get weary, your emotions may feel drained, but your purpose, your God-given assignment is eternal. And when you finally push past this season of exhaustion, when you see the breakthrough, when you step into what you were meant to do, you'll look back at this moment and realize it was just a test, a temporary struggle that tried to stop an eternal calling. And in that moment, you'll be grateful that you didn't let temporary tiredness make you walk away from the destiny God had for you all along. There will come a time in your life when God calls you to step out of what is familiar, to leave behind what is easy, and to walk in obedience even when it feels uncomfortable. It's human nature to seek comfort, to look for the path of least resistance, to choose what feels safe and predictable. But the life God has called you to is not built on comfort, it's built on obedience. And obedience will always take you to places that comfort never will. Comfort will keep you stagnant. It will make you settle for less than what you were created for. It will convince you that where you are is good enough when God is trying to take you somewhere greater. Comfort says, stay where it's safe. Obedience says, step out in faith. Comfort says, don't take the risk. Obedience says, trust God even when you don't understand. Comfort says, what if you fail? Obedience says, God's plans never fail. The question is, which voice are you going to listen to? Look at Abraham. He was comfortable in his homeland, surrounded by everything he knew. But God told him, go to a land I will show you. No map, no directions, no guarantees, just a command to leave the familiar and step into the unknown. And because he obeyed, he became the father of nations. Look at Moses. He was comfortable tending sheep in the wilderness, far from Pharaoh's palace, far from responsibility. But God called him to lead an entire nation out of slavery. He didn't feel qualified. He didn't feel ready. But obedience was never about feelings. It was about trusting the one who calls. And then there's Jesus. He left the comfort of heaven to walk among us, to serve, to heal, to love, and ultimately to suffer. The cross was not comfortable. The weight of the world's sin was not comfortable, but obedience led him there. And because he obeyed, we have salvation. If Jesus had chosen comfort over obedience, where would we be? If he had said, this is too hard, this is too painful, I can't do this, then the price for our redemption would have never been paid. The same is true for you. There is something God is calling you to do, a step he's asking you to take, a purpose he's asking you to walk in. But the enemy will always try to keep you comfortable because he knows that comfort leads to complacency, and complacency leads to missed destiny. He will whisper lies in your ear. It's too hard. It's too risky. You're not ready. But God is saying, trust me. I've already made a way. Just obey. Obedience doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always come with instant rewards. But obedience positions you for blessings that comfort never could. It unlocks doors that would have otherwise remained closed. It aligns you with God's perfect plan, even when you don't understand the process. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water, it wasn't comfortable. The wind was strong, the waves were high, but as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he did the impossible. The moment he chose fear over faith, he started to sink. And that's exactly what happens when we let comfort keep us from obedience. We sink into a life that is far less than what God intended. So what are you going to choose? The comfort of staying where you are, or the obedience to step into something greater? Are you going to let fear keep you still, or are you going to trust God enough to move? Because on the other side of obedience is purpose. On the other side of obedience is breakthrough. On the other side of obedience is everything God has for you. But you will never see it if you refuse to leave your comfort zone. There will always be reasons to stop, to delay, to convince yourself that now is not the right time. Excuses will always be available, but they will never lead you to where God is calling you. Life gets hard, responsibilities pile up, and fear whispers that you are not strong enough, not ready enough, not capable enough. And in those moments, it is easy to justify inaction. It is easy to say, I'll do it when I feel better. I'll move when the conditions are perfect. I'll obey when I have more time. But the truth is, waiting for the perfect moment is just another excuse in disguise. The perfect moment doesn't exist. The only moment you have is now. God never said life would be easy, but he did promise to be your strength. He never said the road would be smooth, but he did promise to walk with you. The problem is, too often people choose to rest in their excuses instead of resting in him. They let their circumstances dictate their obedience. Their feelings dictate their faith. But faith doesn't wait for everything to be convenient. Faith moves. Even when it doesn't feel ready, faith trusts even when it doesn't see the way. Because faith rests in God, not in excuses. Look at Moses. When God called him, he had excuses. I can't speak well. I'm not the right person. Send someone else. But God didn't ask for his qualifications. He asked for his obedience. Look at Gideon. He made excuses about being too weak, too unqualified. But God called him mighty warrior before he ever won a battle. Look at Jonah. He ran from his calling because he was afraid, because he had his own ideas about what should happen. But in the end, God's plan still prevailed. Excuses didn't change the calling, and they won't change yours either. God isn't looking for people who have it all together. He's looking for people who will trust him enough to say yes, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, even when they don't have all the answers. Because rest isn't found in avoidance. Peace isn't found in delay. True rest is found in surrender. When you stop making excuses and start trusting that God's grace is enough, that his strength is made perfect in weakness, that he will equip you for what he's calling you to do. The enemy loves to keep people trapped in excuses because he knows they lead to stagnation. If he can convince you that you're too busy, too broken, too unqualified, then he can keep you from stepping into the life God has for you. He knows that as long as you're waiting for the right time, you'll never move. As long as you're holding on to excuses, you'll never step into purpose. But God is saying, stop resting in your reasons and start resting in me. Jesus never made excuses. He didn't let fear, exhaustion, or the weight of his mission stop him. He didn't say, I'll heal them tomorrow or I'll preach when I have more time. He moved when it was time to move. He obeyed when it was time to obey. And because he did, lives were changed. Because he did, salvation became possible. Imagine if he had waited. Imagine if he had let fear hold him back. Imagine if he had said, not today, maybe later. Now imagine what will happen when you stop waiting, when you stop letting excuses rob you of what God has for you. Imagine the doors that will open when you stop saying, I can't, and start saying, God can. Because the truth is, the only thing standing between you and your calling is the decision to trust him more than your fears, to rest in his promises more than your doubts, to lean on his strength instead of your own excuses. And when you do that, you'll realize that everything you thought was holding you back was never stronger than the God who is calling you forward. So today I challenge you to stop resting in your excuses and start resting in God. Trust that he has already equipped you for the journey ahead, that his plans for you are greater than anything you can imagine. The obstacles, the struggles, the fears, they are real, but they are temporary. God's promises are eternal. When you stop making excuses, you make space for him to move in your life in ways you never thought possible. And when you rest in him, you'll find the strength, peace, and purpose you need to overcome anything that stands in your way. So don't wait for the perfect moment. Move forward, trust him, and let his power carry you to where he's calling you to go. Because when you rest in God, there are no limits to what you can achieve.